1 minute ago. Diddy accused again, ex-worker reveals. Shocking abuse details. On the 12th day of Sean Diddy Combs' trial, a seismic shift occurred when a former employee of Sean Diddy Combs testified in court. Over the past 10 days, the pieces of the case have come to light, and the truth has fallen like dominoes. Her testimony not only reiterated old allegations, but also added new depth to an already complex legal battle. For the first time, the court heard directly from a woman who claimed to have been sexually assaulted by the music mogul. As tensions escalated, so did the stakes for Diddy and his defense team. The following report contains descriptions of sexual assault, emotional trauma, and explicit testimony that may be distressing to some readers. Viewer discretion is advised. At 9 a.m. sharp, the courtroom in Los Angeles Superior Court resumed session for what was expected to be another procedural day in the People v. Sean Combs. No one anticipated what would unfold. As Judge Harrison Trent took his seat, the air in the room grew notably heavier. A murmured shift spread across the gallery as an unexpected witness was sworn in. Her name was withheld from public record for protection, identified in court documents only as Witness B, a former personal assistant to Diddy between 2017 and 2019. Her presence alone prompted visible tension in the defense bench. Her testimony, delivered in a steady voice that belied the gravity of her words, immediately seized the attention of everyone present. "I worked for Mr. Combs for almost 2 years," she began. "During that time, I experienced manipulation, coercion, and eventually assault. I was not the only one, but I am the one standing here today." The courtroom froze. For a trial already rife with bombshell revelations, this was a new frontier, direct criminal allegations from a former staffer with insider access. She recounted her employment timeline, responsibilities, and daily proximity to Diddy's personal and professional life. Then, in excruciating detail, she described an incident she said occurred in late November 2018. According to her statement, she was summoned to a private suite at a luxury hotel in Beverly Hills. The message was marked urgent, relayed by one of Diddy's senior handlers. When she arrived, she claimed the environment was altered, music playing, lights dimmed, and 2 open bottles of alcohol on the table. What happened next, she alleged, amounted to sexual assault. "He asked me to sit. I refused. He closed the door. What followed was not consensual." Gasps escaped from the gallery. The judge immediately called for silence and reminded the press that decorum must be upheld. But the emotional weight of the testimony was undeniable. Cross-examination began swiftly. Diddy's lead attorney, Mark Nipolo, attempted to challenge inconsistencies in her prior deposition and questioned the delay in reporting the incident. "Why now? Why not in 2018? Witness B replied firmly, "Because I was afraid. Because I signed something. Because no one believed me then." Her answer struck a nerve. Nipolo shifted gears, focusing on character assessment. But the prosecution intervened, citing witness protection rights and refocusing attention on the facts. In a strategic move, the prosecution presented contemporaneous texts exchanged between Witness B and another assistant marked November 28, 2018. One read, "He did it again. This time I'm done." The defense objected, citing lack of context, but the judge allowed the record. The jury scribbled furiously. Prosecutors then produced a notarized NDA dated December 3, 2018, allegedly signed under duress by Witness B. The document contained clauses of confidentiality regarding personal conduct and private incidents. The defense tried to portray the NDA as routine standard procedure for high-profile clients, but the language was severe. Phrases like explicit consequences and total silence under penalty stood out. By midday recess, it was clear the trial had taken a dramatic turn. Media outlets scrambled. Social feeds exploded. Hashtags like Witness and Diddy Assault trended within minutes. In the harrowing wake of Mia's testimony, the courtroom descended into a kind of collective hush, not the silence of disinterest, but of gravity. Everyone present knew the case had shifted from a high-profile celebrity trial into something far more systemic. As Mia recounted not only her own abuse, but the machinery of fear and control that enabled it, the scope of Sean Diddy Combs' alleged misconduct grew darker, deeper, and undeniably institutional. On day 12, the prosecution pivoted from personal trauma to enterprise exposure. Mia, known only by a pseudonym for her safety, described how she was not merely abused by her boss, she was silenced, watched, and used as a node in what prosecutors are now calling a culture of coercive compliance. It wasn't just me, Mia told the jury, eyes down, voice cracking. There were systems in place. I wasn't allowed to say no, not even about a sandwich. You think that ends with lunch orders? Through her account, we begin to understand how this was not about singular moments of abuse. It was about continuous access, about surveillance disguised as protection, about psychological leash work that blurred the line between employment and entrapment. Her testimony painted a haunting map of degradation. Diddy, she testified, insisted she remain within reach at all times. Whether he was in the bathroom or the closet, Mia was ordered to follow. It was in those spaces, she said, that the most egregious violations occurred. The jury learned about the forced sexual encounter in a closet in which she said he assaulted her orally, and about another incident in a kitchen where her attempts to maintain professionalism were met with unwanted touching and threats. The defense attempted to destabilize her credibility, suggesting consent or confusion, but the jury wasn't buying it. Her tone was unwavering, her sorrow real. As Mia recounted the moment she woke in a bunk bed to find Diddy's weight pressing against her courtroom, sketch artists reported grown men and women weeping in the gallery. Then came Cassie. Mia wasn't just a victim, she was a witness. Her proximity to Diddy and Cassie Ventura, Diddy's longtime partner, placed her in the eye of the storm. Mia described one vacation, Turks and Caicos, where Cassie burst into her room screaming, "He's going to kill me." They fled, on paddleboards, into the ocean. In what now seems a scene from a psychological thriller, the two women literally escaped by sea, paddling away from a beach where Diddy, she claimed, raged and shouted into the void. "We thought the waves might kill us," Mia said, "but we knew going back to him would definitely destroy us." The prosecution revealed that another employee, Kayla, had tried to report suspicions of abuse at Diddy's Bad Boy Entertainment. The result, she was fired. The alleged justification, not for confronting Mia, not for fighting, but for reporting, for breaking the silence. Mia fought back tears when recalling that incident. "We weren't safe anywhere, not at the parties, not at work, not even in HR." The first known assault occurred, according to Mia, during Diddy's 40th birthday celebration at the Plaza Hotel in New York. In a penthouse lined with velvet and decadence, Mia described being summoned into the kitchen. There, she said, he slipped his hand up her dress while guests laughed and drank only feet away. She never forgot the dissonance, the glamour, and the horror occupying the same room. "He whispered things to me like I belonged to him, like I should be grateful, like he was doing me a favor." Defense attorneys attempted a familiar playbook, confuse timelines, question mental state, imply vendettas. But this wasn't a tabloid witness. This was a woman who'd endured. When asked why she never went to the police, Mia's response hit like a bell through the courtroom. "Because when I told a cop who my boss was, he laughed. He didn't even believe me. He thought I was bragging." She recounted the moment pulled over while rushing to meet Diddy. The officer didn't write a ticket. Instead, he said, "Call your boss then, let me hear his voice." And she did, and the officer laughed. "After that," she said, "I knew no one would help me." Mia's friends were present in the courtroom. They wept openly. As she testified, she never once lifted her eyes, not to the jury, not to Diddy, only downward into whatever memory was playing behind her eyelids. Some called it the most harrowing day of the trial so far. Legal analysts compared it to the pivotal testimony in the Weinstein case. It had that same sharpness, that same feeling that history was shifting under the witness stand. ABC's Aaron Kursky reported that Judge Aaron Subramanian, typically stoic, leaned in closely during her entire testimony. At one point, he paused court for 15 minutes when Mia began to hyperventilate. Later that day, celebrity stylist Deontay Nash resumed his testimony. His earlier description of Diddy assaulting Cassie Ventura was now given fresh gravity by Mia's corroborations. Nash's cross-examination became a theater of fire and poise. He bantered, he rebutted. He called out the defense's implications as ridiculous. He recalled matchmaking Cassie with Michael B. Jordan because they are both fine and single. The jury chuckled briefly, but when asked about the abuse, he turned grave. I saw it, I didn't imagine it. He described seeing Cassie in rooms she didn't want to be in, not because she said so, but because her eyes did. The case originally filed under sex trafficking, and RICO statutes now had not just incidents, but patterns, not just allegations, but atmospheric oppression. The prosecution's goal not to portray Diddy as an isolated abuser, but the architect of a psychologically abusive empire. Former prosecutors called it a chessboard of silence, where every piece was afraid to move, until now. Mia's testimony didn't end in personal trauma. It ended in implication that what happened to her was allowed, funded, and protected by an infrastructure built on compliance and charisma, that behind every forced smile was a non-disclosure agreement, that behind every televised laugh was a controlled backstage scream. You can't say no when you're scared for your rent, your future, your sanity, she said. That's not a job, that's a cage. As day 12 ended, the prosecution hinted at more witnesses, more stories, more nights that weren't just dark but deliberately unlit. The courtroom emptied slowly. The silence outside lingered. And for the first time in this trial, the phrase, "If they say I gave up," echoed beyond Twitch's case. It applied here too, because no one had given up. They had just been trying to survive. Court began with forensic psychologist Dr. Lana Hill taking the stand. She specialized in trauma-informed testimony. Using Mia's statement as a reference point, Hill laid out how coercive control operates in high-status employment settings. She described it as a slow corrosion of autonomy. It's a process, Yubar, she said. The abuser often blends rewards with punishments until the victim internalizes a new reality where obedience feels like safety. The jury listened as she walked through examples that eerily matched Mia's testimony: isolation through overwork, bodily proximity, enforced under the guise of security gaslighting, masked as mentorship. It was a blueprint, and it matched too many accounts to be a coincidence. Prosecutors then entered into evidence a batch of non-disclosure agreements, NDAs recovered from a digital archive linked to Bad Boy Entertainment. These NDAs bore dates that overlapped with key events described by multiple witnesses. One clause stood out, a morality clause that stated employees could not speak negatively about the company or its affiliates, even after termination. Penalties included financial retraction, litigation threats, and industry blacklisting. An HR rep turned whistleblower, identified as Brianna, testified that the NDAs were standard issue, even for interns. We were told it was part of protecting the brand, she said. But it protected people, not the kind you'd want protected. So Cassie Ventura's name resurfaced again and again. Though not yet called to testify, her presence lingered like a shadow. Mia had placed her in the center of several key events. Now another former employee, Marcus, took the stand. He'd been a driver and personal assistant. With nervous hands, he described picking Cassie up from luxury hotels after private meetings that left her emotionally shattered. She never said what happened, he said. She didn't have to. One night in particular, after an after-party in Los Angeles, Cassie asked him if he believed in angels. I said yes, Marcus testified. She said good, because you might have to pray for me one day. Perhaps the most disturbing revelation came from surveillance expert Kevin Lantham, a security consultant hired to analyze footage from Diddy's home and affiliated venues. Using enhanced timestamps, Lantham confirmed there were blackout periods in the footage deleted files, corresponding to dates of reported abuse. One of these dates aligned with a previous testimony. Another aligned with a scheduled visit from a federal labor inspector. Prosecutors suggested intentional erasure, and then came the locked room. Lantham testified that a portion of Diddy's estate was permanently off the internal surveillance grid. No feeds, no archives, no maintenance logs. It was referred to in scheduling software as Zone Zero. "I've worked on cartel safehouses cleaner than this," Lantham said. The courtroom murmured. The judge asked for an order. Legal analyst Jordan Clemens was called to clarify Diddy's influence network. Clemens mapped out donations, political fundraising, and celebrity endorsements that created what he called a halo effect. People assumed safety because of proximity to fame, he explained, but influence isn't safe, it's often insulation. He detailed how internal complaints disappeared, how employees who reported misconduct were reassigned to less visible positions or encouraged to take unpaid leave. Then came Naomi, not her real name, but real pain. Naomi worked in digital content for one of Diddy's ventures. She described a slow grooming process, invites to VIP meetings, mentorship dinners, then gradually physical oversteps. "You feel chosen," she said, "until you realize you're trapped." Her breaking point came after she rejected an advance. She was immediately demoted, her work reassigned, and her email privileges revoked. It was like vanishing while still sitting at your desk. Her testimony ended with a chilling quote, "They didn't need you to love them, just to never say no." Legal observers noted a clear shift. The case was no longer about singular sexual misconduct. It was evolving into a RICO-style prosecution, suggesting an ongoing criminal enterprise involving psychological manipulation, forced silence, and institutional complicity. One document presented showed payments to private firms for reputation monitoring and employee sentiment analysis. Internal notes described Mia as media volatile and Cassie as loyal unpredictable. These weren't personal notes, they were logistical. The hashtag #Diddy Trial Day 13 trended globally. Think pieces filled op-ed pages. Survivors from unrelated industries began sharing stories, drawing parallels. Outside the courthouse, a growing group of demonstrators held signs reading, "Silence is a system." By the close of Part 3 of the trial, even skeptics within the legal world began to shift tone. Diddy's legal team, previously buoyant, now appeared fractured. Internal arguments during breaks became common. Judge Subramanian, who had initially resisted media access, permitted select court transcripts to be published in real time. It was no longer about evidence, it was about narrative and who would define this era of reckoning. More witnesses were scheduled for Day 14. More layers to peel. But one thing was clear, silence was no longer a shield, it was Exhibit A. As Day 13 of the Diddy trial began, the courtroom no longer felt like a venue for justice, it felt like the center of a reckoning. What began as a testimony about individual abuse was now pulling back the curtain on an entire culture of complicity within the entertainment industry. The prosecution's next move would deepen this transformation, connecting the personal horror of Mia's story to a sprawling infrastructure of protection, silence, and power. Federal prosecutor James Nguyen took center stage with a bold new strategy to show the jury that what happened to Mia and Cassie Ventura was not only permitted, but facilitated by a network that knew and looked the other way. He introduced what he called the Whisper Network, a loose alliance of employees, publicists, bodyguards, assistants, and enablers who, knowingly or not, became part of a system designed to isolate and control. The first witness of the day, a former tour manager for Bad Boy Entertainment. Testifying under immunity, she described a code system used among staff. Red light meant Diddy was in a volatile state. Blue sky meant guests were present. Black room meant no phones, no cameras, no questions. We weren't protecting him from the public, she testified. We were protecting the brand from the truth. The prosecution revealed contracts between Diddy's companies and luxury hotel chains. These weren't standard bookings. They included clauses requesting control of entire floors, private entrances, and staff pre-screened by external security teams. At the Waldorf Astoria in 2018, according to hotel logs, the 15th floor was exclusively reserved for a creative retreat. It included 22 guests, 3 bodyguards, and no press allowed. Mia was assigned to this floor. She never left it for 4 days. They told me it was a privilege, she had previously testified. But I didn't feel free. I felt watched. A bombshell came in the form of internal emails retrieved from a former executive assistant's hard drive. One email dated September 12, 2019 read, "Need Mia to re-sign NDA. Diddy has been concerned about her energy lately. Schedule her for a wellness weekend." The email was forwarded to multiple senior staffers. Attached was a revised non-disclosure agreement with updated clauses including financial penalties for emotional or reputational damages caused by breach. They called it a wellness weekend, the assistant testified. But it was really just code for isolate and recondition. In a highly anticipated testimony, former bodyguard Marcus Tillman took the stand. Stoic, measured, and visibly uneasy, he described a climate of fear of being fired, fear of reprisal, fear of becoming a target. Tillman was hired in 2015 and worked for Diddy until 2021. He recounted one night in Miami when he heard screaming from a suite. He was ordered to remain at his post. The next day he asked about it. His supervisor replied, "You didn't hear anything. You don't want to hear anything." Tillman left the company shortly after Cassie Ventura's lawsuit became public. "I started to see that I wasn't protecting a man," he said. "I was protecting a system." The courtroom bristled as digital forensics expert Janelle Reyes presented evidence of internal surveillance systems used at Diddy's properties. Keycards, security cameras, and facial recognition logs were not only used for safety, but allegedly to monitor employees' movement and emotional demeanor. There was pattern analysis software, Reyes said. It tracked smiles, eye contact, even body posture. If someone looked off, they'd get flagged for a performance check-in. Performance in this case didn't mean professional output. It meant compliance. The prosecution next turned to human resources, the department typically expected to protect employees. But in this case, HR wasn't a lifeline. It was a trap. Multiple former employees testified that complaints made to HR were rerouted to legal. Rather than investigating, HR representatives coached them on minimizing claims. One former intern broke down in tears, recalling a complaint she made about inappropriate touching. "They told me to be flattered," she said. "Then they cut my internship short." At the core of the prosecution's narrative was what they called the isolation playbook. Victims, especially women, were strategically separated from their peers' families, and even themselves. Witnesses detailed how they were flown to remote locations on vague assignments. Their phones confiscated, their schedules controlled. By the time you realized something was wrong, one said, you didn't have anyone to call. One particularly disturbing instance involved a staff member who was relocated to Diddy's Aspen compound for event support. She wasn't allowed to leave for 6 weeks. Her contract listed her as a creative wellness coordinator. "I didn't coordinate anything," she said. "I just cleaned and kept quiet." Though names were redacted in open court, closed session documents indicated that certain celebrities were aware at least partially of what occurred at these gatherings. Prosecutors alluded to encrypted group chats, party itineraries, and anonymized testimonials from guests who felt something was wrong but didn't speak up. The implication silence wasn't just passive, it was strategic. By the end of day 13, it was clear that this trial was moving toward more than a conviction. It was moving toward a cultural indictment. The entertainment industry's long-standing immunity from accountability was under siege. Legal commentators began speculating about potential RICO expansions, not just against Diddy, but against his company's collaborators and institutions that allowed harm to flourish unchecked. As the session closed, Prosecutor Nguyen summarized, "This is not about vengeance. It's about ending a cycle. It's about declaring that charisma is not consent, that power is not pure, and that silence is not protection, it's complicity." The courtroom was adjourned. The silence that followed wasn't stunned, it was resolute. As day 13 of the trial against Sean Diddy Combs commenced, it became clear to everyone in the room that this wasn't just a legal proceeding, it was a moral confrontation. The prosecution, armed with testimony from previous witnesses, launched into their next sequence with striking precision. Their aim, not just to recount past traumas, but to establish an undeniable culture of predation masked by wealth and fame. The day began with the unexpected appearance of a new witness, a former executive assistant at Bad Boy Entertainment, introduced under the pseudonym Janelle for her protection. Her entrance was quiet, but what followed silenced even the most seasoned court reporters. "He didn't just ruin lives in private," Janelle stated, looking directly at the jury. "He groomed us in public." She described how Diddy often held team meetings disguised as after-hours creative sessions, lavish gatherings that blurred the boundaries between work and worship. Alcohol flowed, staff dressed like clubgoers, and music blared. But beneath the glitz, Janelle said, lay pressure. Pressure to laugh, to dance, to comply. Her account included repeated instances of verbal intimidation, emotional manipulation, and sexual innuendo. On one occasion, she described being told to loosen up before Diddy placed his hand on her waist and whispered a warning, "You're either in this or you're gone." Janelle spoke to a broader organizational silence. She recounted how coworkers avoided eye contact during uncomfortable moments, how HR was non-existent in practice, and how survivors who tried to speak out were labeled unstable or ungrateful. One chilling anecdote involved a receptionist who refused to attend a team retreat in Miami. She was fired the following week. "We weren't a team," Janelle said. "We were a cult of silence." The prosecution's strategy evolved by the hour. Instead of focusing on Diddy's individual actions, they began to draw a pyramid of influence with Diddy at the apex, and a network of enablers beneath him, executives, PR agents, assistants, and yes, celebrities. Text messages entered into evidence, showed how victims were warned in coded language not to deviate from the narrative. One message from a high-ranking executive read, "Tell her to get on script or off payroll." Another message showed a transfer of $25,000 labeled as a wellness stipend, sent to a former stylist days after she posted a vague tweet about workplace trauma. Then came the testimony of a woman referred to only as Leah, who attended one of Diddy's infamous stillness weekends. Billed as wellness retreats for creatives, they were, according to Leah, elaborate grooming grounds. "No phones, no clocks, no exit without permission," Leah testified. "It was like a luxury prison." She described workshops that turned into pressure sessions where participants were coerced into revealing their insecurities, only for those vulnerabilities to be used against them later. One night, she claimed a fellow guest attempted to leave early. Security detained them. Diddy arrived furious. "You leave when I say," he said, according to Leah. "This is my world." The defense team, increasingly cornered, attempted to shift the narrative. They implied that witnesses were coordinated by an anti-Diddy media machine, that these accusations were timed, orchestrated, strategic. But the witnesses didn't appear scripted, they appeared haunted. One attorney even questioned the psychological stability of Mia, the earlier accuser. The prosecutor responded with visible fury. "The only thing unstable in this courtroom is the legacy of unchecked power." The judge called for a recess. As court resumed, another bombshell dropped. A former romantic partner of Diddy's name, withheld for protection, agreed to testify. Her statement, submitted under seal and read by the prosecution, included explicit details of coercion, financial control, and emotional blackmail. One excerpt read, "He made me feel lucky to be chosen, then punished me for every doubt. He didn't break me overnight, he wore me down." Outside the courtroom, crowds had grown larger. Survivors held signs. Dancers performed silent routines. Chants of "no more silence" echoed through the city blocks. Even as the legal system crawled toward accountability, the public had made up its mind. Diddy wasn't just on trial in court, he was on trial in culture. Toward the end of day 13, the prosecutor turned toward the jury with a single sentence. "This isn't about what one man did in the dark, it's about how many people saw it and looked away." The court adjourned with murmurs that more subpoenas were being prepared. More witnesses were stepping forward. And in the gallery, one former assistant was overheard whispering, "It's finally happening. The empire's cracking." The morning of day 17 brought a tension that vibrated through the courthouse walls. No longer were the proceedings just about Sean Diddy Combs. They had widened into a national discourse on power silence and systems of complicity. Prosecutors began by confirming the authenticity of an internal email chain from Bad Boy Entertainment's upper executive team. The subject line read, "Mia situation, containment." The contents read aloud in court included directives to tighten NDAs, limit PR exposure, and monitor all employee cross-contact. A damning line followed. She was never supposed to be in that room. Reassign, relocate, resolve. What room? What moment? The prosecution moved quickly to tie this to the December 2019 party at Diddy's West Hollywood estate, a gathering where Mia had been seen exiting a guest suite in tears. The timeline aligned. Witnesses from that night, previously too afraid to speak, were now ready. Enter Luz Herrera. She was the housekeeper assigned to the guest wing the following morning. Her demeanor was humble, her voice soft, but her memory was crisp. There was blood on the sheets, she told the jury, holding up photographs taken on her personal phone. "I was told to throw everything away and keep quiet." Asked who gave the order, she hesitated, then answered firmly, "Mr. Combs' assistant. He said it was a private matter." The state introduced what it called behavioral repetition. A forensic psychologist testified that Diddy's pattern of coercive control matched traits found in predatory dominant systems, where gifts, proximity, and flattery are used to erode boundaries. Excerpts from old interviews were played. In one, Diddy claimed, "My people are loyal because I keep them close." In another, "I know what they want, I give them dreams." But now the dream has curdled. Jurors saw through the charisma. Next came DJ Marcus V, once a fixture in Diddy's circle. He used music like a leash, Marcus said. He'd signal what he wanted through songs. When No Diggity played, staff knew to vacate the guest areas. When he played Let's Get It On, you stayed out of the pool house. A chilling realization swept the room. Even the parties were orchestrated signals of manipulation. In a dramatic moment, Cassie Ventura herself was recalled to the stand. The defense objected, but Judge Subramanian allowed her rebuttal. "I lived in fear. I lived in a dream where I wasn't allowed to wake up," she said. "Mia and I, women like us, we weren't victims. We were currency." Her testimony stunned. She revealed that Diddy allegedly used therapists and wellness retreats as psychological gatekeepers, people who, under the guise of healing, monitored emotional fragility and funneled individuals back into his influence. An investigative journalist took the stand next. She had uncovered a network of wellness providers affiliated with Diddy's companies. None had state licenses. One had been paid $900,000 in 1 year. Her report was headlined, "Therapy as a Cage." The courtroom erupted. Spectators gasped. The judge ordered silence. The climax of the day came when prosecutors played previously sealed surveillance footage. It showed a hallway inside the estate, time-stamped 2:14 a.m. December 14, 2019. Mia is seen stumbling out of a room. Out. Seconds later, Diddy follows shirtless, shouting something inaudible. He grabs her wrist. She pulls away. He slaps the wall in frustration. A security guard steps forward, then hesitates and backs off, the room frozen. As the tape ended, one juror visibly wiped tears. Another held their head in their hands. The gravity had shifted again. Diddy's defense team asked for a recess. It was granted. But the damage had been done. Outside protests grew. Former bad boy interns held signs reading, "We weren't interns. We were trained." Survivors from other parts of the industry began coming forward. One former tour manager recounted in a sworn affidavit how he was told to keep the girls hydrated and keep them dreaming. Federal investigators confirmed they were opening a parallel case based on RICO violations. This was no longer about Diddy alone. It was about a machine. Prosecutor Lina Ramirez gave a closing line before the day's adjournment. "You can call it power. You can call it influence, but let's call it what it is, predation." And then she turned to Diddy pointedly and asked, "Isn't that what you said in that 2007 interview? You can either be the shepherd or you can be the slaughter." Well, Mr. Combs, we now know who's bleeding. As day 17 concluded, one thing was clear: the trial had stopped being about celebrities. It had become an autopsy of power. Reporters left their press boxes changed. The public watching live feeds and reading courtroom transcripts was no longer whispering. They were shouting. And Mia, she had done what no one else could. She brought the story back to the humans at the center. The reckoning was no longer looming. It had arrived.